entirely devoted to a contemporary novel and to its author. Saul Bellow's latest book, Humboldt's Gift, which came out this autumn, has received as good a press in England as it's possible to have while you're still alive. In fact, many of the reviewers were already lining him up with the great dead. The Only Stinker highlighted that. It's a rich and absorbing book, I think, full of ideas, quotations, characters and observations on American and general life in the world today, all that Dickens of the mind variety we expect from the author of Herzog and The Adventures of Augie Marsh. As in all Bellow's novels, the book's about the central and serious issues of the day as he sees them. Bellow makes no bones about addressing himself to the purpose and meaning of life today as weightily and as wittily as he can. Bellow himself, of course, has been part of the literary and intellectual community of America for 30 years. He teaches still in Chicago, where he was brought up, although in fact he was born across the Great Lake, north in Canada. Humboldt's Gift is about two writers. Humboldt himself, who had a brilliant first book of poems published, and then, in the Greenwich Village intellectual whirlpool of the 1930s, found himself sucked down into depressions, various manias, imaginative incontinence, and despair. And Charlie Citrine, who's the main protagonist of the book and Humboldt's protege. He's moderately successful. He's had a play on Broadway, which has been made into a film. He's written 2 or 3 books which have done quite well. He teaches in Chicago, and he's attached to Humboldt. Charlie Citrine is on the run in this book, and in the excerpts we're going to show, we meet his wife, with whom he's involved in a vicious divorce, his mistress, who's fleecing him, and a first love from his adolescence to which he can never go back. We dramatised about 30-40 minutes from the book, and Ben Reed, the producer of this programme, has put them together with Richard Pascoe, Marius Goring, Betsy Blair, Gail Honeycutt and Carolyn Blakiston. In and out of these we're threading a conversation which Bellow and I had recently in London. Saul Bellow had just caught up on the American reviews of the book when we talked, and I began by asking him how he thought the book had gone down over there.
It's clear, I think, that they reviewed me rather than the book, that they were out to take my measure and to seed me, as they do in Forest Hills tennis, and couldn't decide just where to put me. What struck me also is that they didn't seem aware of the fact that it was a funny book. At least I thought it was a funny book. I kept laughing as I was putting it together.
Was it anything to do with simple things, you think, like the book is set in Chicago, you are Chicago-based, you're quite straightforwardly a Chicago man. You took Chicago on in the book. In fact, somebody I was talking to while I was in Chicago was saying it's the biggest book written about Chicago ever. It's full of Chicago. If you know Chicago, you know everybody.
Well, there is a mixture of the two cities. It is a tale of two cities. If I may promote myself into the Dickens League, it's as much New York as it is Chicago. But true enough, it is a book about Chicago, a good deal of it, which I identify entirely with the USA. I don't see New York as representing the USA. But Chicago is clearly the representative American city, much more so than San Francisco, say.
The Humboldt in the book is represented very much as a New York literary figure. Where did you get the idea for writing about him, as distinct from your hero, Charles Citrine? Where did the idea of Humboldt and the idea of the idea of the book come from?
Well, any self-respecting Chicago writer of my generation would immediately cut out for New York as soon as he had gotten his college degree to find the action. The action then was in Greenwich Village, and that was what I made a beeline for as soon as I could.
Did you find the European literary world, in a sense, or of your dreams?
Yeah, something like it. Or I found a group of people who were importing European culture into the United States. That is to say, the partisan review people who followed in the footsteps of a magazine of the 1920s called The Dial, which was a marvelous thing, and which printed Marianne Moore, T.S. Eliot, Thomas Mann, Kafka. It was a very advanced magazine for its time, and had gone under, of course, as all such things quickly go under in the States. Partisan Review was one of the many attempts made in the 1930s to revive that kind of avant-garde journal. And their contributors were Kessler, Orwell, Malraux, André Gide, as well as the American writers. They were very good.
Were Rav and people.
Philip Rav, Delmore Schwartz, Dwight MacDonald were the principal editors.
It's quite a lineup.
Yes, it was a good lineup. They were good people, mostly. Some of them were stinkers.
Could you tell us a little more about the sort of life that Humboldt would live? It was entirely to do with his quest for things which pleased his mind, wasn't it, really?
Yes, his mind and his spirit and his sense of the importance of art and ideas, which he had to maintain in a, I shan't say a Philistine society. Well, why not? In a Philistine society.
Was there some sense of opposition between art and life, like that friend of T.S. Eliot's who said, some people say life's a thing, but I prefer to read books? Was there a sense in which Humboldt felt that that what he was doing was better than life, was greater than life, was grander, and it was not circumscribed, but certainly dependent on knowledge and not on experience? Was there this juxtaposition?
Well, I don't really think so. It's true that when he's off his rocker, he shouts over the phone to Charlie, this is life, not literature. This is from Bellevue, where they've locked him in the loony bin. And he thinks he's found life now. But that's a very literary idea of life in itself. I mean, it's the sort of thing that happened to Verlaine, and I'm sure this must have been in Humboldt's mind when he shouted that he had found that he was now securely footed in life, and that he had left the world of literary illusion behind. But in his saner moments, I would have thought that he would say that art was something that life couldn't do without, and there was not this sort of divorce at all, but that art was one of the powers that made life life. I think we all believed that. I think I still do.
You comment as the author of the book, sensibility made it big later on, and Humboldt was one of the people responsible for making sensibility big. In a sense, he's a proselytizer for that way of life. He finds Charlie as a disciple in the true sense, somebody who will carry on and be able to carry on what he stands for.
Yes, I think Charlie's being ironic about the word sensibility because it was a professorial word, especially for people who were writing about Henry James. And there was a glut of Henry James essays just about this time. And professors were sounding off about Henry James's sensibility. And we got a little tired of it.
You make very vivid, I think what's maybe as hard a thing as it's possible to think one can do in novels. You say that Humboldt was a genius at conversation. Mm-hmm. Whether you use that particular phrase, I'm paraphrasing that. And then you do it. You give us quite a number of pages, at several points in the book, paraphrases of his conversation. You felt, obviously you had to do that. Was that something that you took on with some trepidation, or...?
No, not at all. I have very good recall for such things, and there were master conversationalists in the village in the 30s and 40s and 50s. Some of them were quite extraordinary.
So a lot of Humboldt's conversation is based on conversations you yourself took part in?
Oh, yes. Yes. There were these great jamborees, conversational jamborees, when 10 people would get together of an evening in someone's pad with beer, or if they couldn't afford gin, and sound off about everything under the sun.
Interesting, there's a cross because Charlie comes to New York to get into the literary scene. Humboldt moves out to a marvellously described ruinous parody of a country retreat. Leads precisely the same life as is leading in Greenwich Village, except it's even slummier. That.
Well, here it is. How'd you like the ride?
Oh, great, Humboldt.
What a car. You know, I must be the first port in America to have power brakes. Can you imagine Walt Whitman in a car like that?
He'd be a changed man.
We are all changed men. Mammon and Orpheus. Breathe the air. What about this air, eh?
It's wonderful air.
This castle hath a pleasant seat. The air doth nimbly commend itself. Come on in.
Thanks. Thanks, Humboldt.
All right.
Charlie, how lovely to see you.
You look beautiful. Oh, nowhere New Jersey. It suits you.
And you're so smart. Isn't he sharp, Humboldt?
Yeah, it's for this interview tomorrow. I feel ridiculous.
Well, you're sure to impress, looking so sharp.
Well, what have you been doing?
Just sitting round.
Didn't go out?
Well, where would I go? You know, I just sit here reading books. Henry James today.
Uh-huh.
Excuse me.
Thanks.
I have to watch every move she makes.
What, Kathleen? That's absurd.
Now, sit down. You don't know a thing. Before we were married, her father took her and sold her to one of the Rockefellers. She said she was going to the French bakery. Vanished for almost a year.
Which of the Rockefellers bought her?
Bought. That is the word. Bought. Never again smile when you read about white slavery in the Sunday supplements.
I suppose it was all against her will.
Well, she's very pliant. You see what a dove she is. That vile old man took her and sold her. Oh, son. Have you ever read the psychopathology of everyday life?
Yeah, of course.
Well, psychopathology is everyday life. It's that goddamn drama critic hanging around now.
Oh, Humboldt, you're quite wrong. Believe me. Kathleen loves you. She worships you. You're her poet king.
Oh, you don't know a thing. Why, I made it too young. Lots of people waiting for me to fall flat on my face. I have millions of enemies.
Hey, what is that thing?
That's the Merck Manual, of course.
Huh?
You mean you don't have one? How can you be an artist in the 20th century and not know your pharmaceuticals? Why, your girlfriend's worth 10 of you. I can talk Dexedril with her all night long. Have a drink?
Yeah, great. Why not?
Great things ahead, Charlie.
We could eat now if you like.
Eat? We're going to play football. Play it, Charlie. Jumping like Nijinsky. Kathleen, hello. Play 7. Here you are, Charlie. It's a good life here. You know that feeling of a fundamental world, a home world that somehow you've lost. Virgil's farm, the frontier. I think I can swing it here, Charlie. I love this place. Don't that goddamn crossroad too close.
Cottage is tipping over, bit by bit.
Goddamn flimsy hut. I'll have to prop it up. I'll be damned if I will. I'll sue the county.
You sue anybody, Humboldt.
You're damn right I will. Goddamn hut.
I thought you liked it.
I do. I love the place.
Really won't mind very much if I go to bed.
Hey, now drink, Charlie.
Yeah.
I'm not a solitary, Charlie. I'm an active man.
You're an intriguer.
I'm not an intriguer.
You're a fantastical plotter.
I'll accept that. Now listen, things are going to change in this country. Do you know who's going to be next president?
Eisenhower.
Adlai Stevenson is going to beat Ike in November. Culture will be in at the White House for the first time in centuries. Philistinism will be finished. Adlai Stevenson is in, literature is in. We're in.
You and me personally?
Stevenson will be the first intellectual president since Lincoln. He was a manic depressive like me.
What?
Stevenson reads my poems.
How do you know that?
I'm not free to tell you how. He carries my ballads on his campaign trail. Stevenson and I are in communication, and not only through poetry. Third parties have made telephone calls, discreet overtures.
You're gonna be like Goethe at Weimar, is that it?
It's going to be a new golden age, Charlie. You were thinking what you'd like to do? Something in the Library of Congress? For a start? Antonin Artaud invited the most brilliant intellectuals in Paris to a lecture. When they came, no lecture. Artaud comes on stage and screams. Just screams. Opens his mouth, screams for an hour. And they loved it. Now do you see what I can give the Stevenson administration?
All this cotton wool, it's like mouse droppings.
You trust me, don't you, Charlie?
Christ, Humboldt, do I trust the Gulf Stream? What am I supposed to trust you in?
You know how I feel about you. Interknitted. Brother and brother. I know you love me.
It's true, Humboldt, but just to say it once, huh?
You got a bank account. Where you keep your money?
At the Chase. I got about $12.
Where's your checkbook?
In my coat.
Let's see it.
See, the balance is only 8. What are you doing, Humboldt? Huh?
I am writing a blank check in your name. You do the same. No date, no amount, just pay von Humboldt Fleischer.
What's it about? I don't like this.
Only $8, you should care.
Yeah, it's not just the money.
Money, you're right. Now, if ever you're up against it, fill in any amount you need and cash it. Same goes for me, but only in direst need. We'll never abuse it. Take care of that. It's dangerous. I mean, valuable. This makes us blood brothers. It's a covenant.
Humboldt, I really have to sleep now.
I'll just sit up for a little while. You nearly missed me, Charlie. I'm going for a run.
For a run? Did you sleep well?
Sleep? I was up all night. How would I sleep? My thoughts are too deep. My feelings too dense. When Swift was secretary to Sir William Temple, he ran for miles every day to blow off steam. You gonna sweat the gin out, too?
No, I couldn't, Humboldt.
Okay, off we go.
He's been like this lately. Sometimes he doesn't sleep for a week. I don't know what's going to happen to us, Charlie.
So I think that Citrine is critical of Humboldt's taking the path of orthodoxy. That is to say that Humboldt is in some way following the pattern of the doomed poet. He's doing what the middle class expects him to do. Charlie is much offended by this and thinks that a man has destroyed himself simply to follow that banal pattern. It's become banal. I hate to say this, some of my very dear friends followed it to death. I think of someone like John Berryman, whom I loved very much.
The pattern being great success on the highest possible level in early life, then a great deal of drink and general disintegration, followed by ending one's life.
Yeah, I think Berryman drank himself into decay, and then he simply couldn't hack it anymore. His liver was gone, and his lungs were failing, and his mind, perhaps, was affected.
I think it's a pattern that Humboldt himself saw and felt forced to follow.
I think that Humboldt accepted that kind of definition, and it was not self-definition. It was not the original self-description of the poet. It was something imposed or something borrowed, and it was fatal, I believe.
But what would you say were the main differences between Humboldt and Citrine?
I think that Humboldt accepts the principles of modernism. I think Charlie does not, and Charlie's making an end run, a comic end run, as we say, as a term taken from football, from American football. Say he's circumventing, he's getting around lots of things, of which he disapproves. He thinks that modernism has become a mass of worn-out ideas, and he rejects them. He thinks of Humboldt as their victim.
There's a sense in which Humboldt is determined to get hold of, and Charlie, in the book, in their different ways, is determined to get hold of the whole of America, whether it's to do with football or writing or thought or history or politics. They're going to get the whole of it and turn it at the least into conversation and at the most into significant works. Was this happening in the village, and is this Humboldt's mission in a way, and Citrine's mission?
Well, I think it's characteristic of American literature altogether that it speaks with the voice of the American people. It transposes that voice into something literary. This is a discovery made by Mark Twain in Huckleberry Finn. The language of Huck Finn is the language of the frontier. Mark Twain discovered how to inject it with poetry and how to make a literary language of it. Ever since then, I think that's been the model. It was the model for Ring Lardner. It was the model for Hemingway. It was the model, in some sense, for Faulkner. That is to say, to take the spoken language, the language of the streets and farms, and to blend it with another kind of thing, to make literature of it. The symbolists were doing the same thing. I mean, Eliot was doing the same thing in The Wasteland. You know, hurry up, please, it's time. Time, gentlemen, time.
Washing her feet in soda water.
Mrs. Porter and her daughter washing their feet in soda water, and then mixing that with les voix des enfants qui chantent dans la coupole and so on, and with Spencer's Sweet Thames. And all the rest of that is this mixture, which you find in Eliot and Joyce, which you find also in American writing. It seems to have worked back and forth over the Atlantic.
Did the village life give it a new tincture? The life that Humboldt and Citrine led in the 30s in the book. Did that give it something extra, something special? Or what was the tone of that, particularly?
These writers were all American kids who came up from the streets and who got a certain amount of book culture and who understood how to blend the two curiously, and were often very funny about it. I remember an expression who was sweeping the village in the early 50s, off the couch by Christmas. Well, this was for people who were being psychoanalyzed, who had who were kept broke by their analysts, who gave themselves this slogan. Well, there was a lot of that in Charlie, a lot of that in Humboldt, you see. Humboldt was always mixing up baseball, Buffalo Bill, and Yeats.
Another fascination that Humboldt has, and Charlie has, and American writers have, as distinct from English writers at the moment anyway, which is they're very concerned to have their say about politics, and if possible to have an influence on politics. Humboldt's delighted that Adlai Stevenson might get elected, because then writers would be important and have an influence.
I've noticed in a long life of hanging around with these people, and being one of them myself, that they would rather travel in such company than write books. It's damn hard to write these books, especially in the United States, where during the term of composition is while you're writing a book, you are out of it. You are by yourself sitting in a room with lots of papers, while life storms and rages out there and all the important things are happening. And in your fantasies, of course, you want to burst from loneliness and go to Washington and talk about Proust with LBJ. Well, LBJ is not likely to talk to you about Proust. Wouldn't have given a damn about him if he hadn't known who he was. So there you are, you see, feeling yourself out of it and having a fantasy of swooping down from your angelic height and being received with open arms by all of these yahoos.
I'm paraphrasing, but in your book at one stage, I think it's Humboldt who said something to the effect of failures are the only successes in American literature.
Yes, the failures are successes because they fit into the orthodox pantheon. The ultimate success with certain people is a failure, is Hart Crane, who goes over the side of the ship, is Edgar Allan Poe, who's found dying in the gutter, and so on. That's the cachet. That's the ultimate honor.
Why is that, do you think?
Well, simply because American society does not want its successes to be to go out in a blaze of glory. It wants them to go down. For all I know, Nixon may become one of these ultimate successes through having been kicked around so much.
Another part of this is money, of course, which at one stage Humboldt says, I wish somebody would give me, with $1 million I would be free to think of nothing but poetry, Humboldt says. And that, in a sense, is the purest attitude towards money in a book which, among an enormous number of other things, is saturated with notions of money. Money is very important to these two writers in different ways.
Yes, it is. Well, of course, money is one of the great mysteries. And no one has ever gotten to the bottom of Plutus. And probably no one ever will. But it's something of a joke, and I think Charlie sees it as a joke. That because he's written certain things, he's been flooded with money. And he says capitalism is having one of its jokes. Capitalism made me rich for reasons of its own. And then I think his brother Julius says, I knew there was something. I knew that capitalism was failing when you became rich through writing all that lousy stuff. Well, perhaps there's something to that. But I think it has to do with the fact that capitalism rewards its severest critics.
Would it be fair to say that you like the idea of a writer not exactly living in a garret and grubbing around Fleet Street, but in his place as somebody, on the whole, neglected, and that does him quite a lot of good?
Well, I wouldn't go so far as to say that. I would say that whatever throws shadows on his heart is bad, and that he has some purity which is essential to his task to preserve. And if people are not corrupted by money, well and good. I have no objection to the money per se, nor do I like the superstition that says that money is necessarily corrupting. I can think of lots of rich writers who were not corrupted by money.
Can you say the same of publicity? Because the thing that's most, the publicity side of success, is that not necessarily corrupting, or do you think it is?
Well, it's a distraction rather than a corruption. I mean, it corrupts by distracting, That's the bad thing. It turns artists into other avenues. They've got to be prodigiously strong to withstand it, I think. And it's sort of unwelcome attention that society rewards them with, which often does them little or no good. The main thing, after all, for the writer is to be a writer. I don't think that he should be too tense and wary about selling out. That's a superstition that many American writers got into when they went to Hollywood and so on. I don't know they would have been much good without Hollywood. Many of them were obviously no good at all. Some who left in order to protect their purity were no good too. So that's not really the question. Nobody gives a damn about what the writer does to preserve his purity. All that matters is what he writes.
One of the things that money does lead to, though, in Humboldt's Gift, where the law suddenly, which reappears in your book in a massive way as it does in Dickens's books, but in Dickens's books, laws are to do with, generally, with wills and testaments. But in your book, it's to do with divorce settlements, really, and leads him straight into this made angrier through money, battle with his wife. Would you say that money was, in that sense, inflammatory in that particular predicament, in the divorce situation?
I think it's educational. I think that what it leads him to is the point from which it all becomes immensely comical for him, and I think that that's the only way to deal with it. I don't think it can be taken seriously. It shouldn't be taken seriously except as comedy. It's the comedy of it that appeals to him now, and he's quite detached, I think. He's a man of detached elegance. That's the way I see him. And
but putting it simply, if he didn't have so much money, would Denise be as ferocious with him, and would he be as in so many difficulties about her in the divorce, which is one of the plot centers of the book?
No, I'm sure that if he didn't have the money, Denise would not be such a blood drinker. But she is a blood drinker because he's got the money, and she's being extraordinarily vengeful. But he's rather grateful to her because he thinks it is liberating. It wakes him up. It's rousing. And he says to Thaxter, I think, if I remember correctly, if she weren't suing me, I'd never get out of the house at all. I owe it to her that I'm downtown among all these people. Now, aren't they wonderful?
Mr. Citrine, you have a slightly persecuted look. I hope you understand that I am impartial and that I intend to be fair to both parties. I myself don't think you intend to run away from your responsibilities, and even Mrs. Citrine admits you're a very affectionate father. But people can do desperate things.
Well, I hope that you and Mrs. Citrine and a lawyer will leave me a little something to live on, Judge. Bloodsucker. Denise!
I'm absolutely exhausted. I never get any sleep before these court days.
Dreadfully sorry.
You don't look so well yourself.
Yeah, the girls tell me sometimes, Daddy, you look like $1 million. Green and wrinkled. How are they, Denise?
As well as they can be. They missed you.
That's normal, I suppose.
Nothing is normal for them. They miss you painfully.
You are to sorrow what Vermont is to syrup.
What am I supposed to say to that? Syrup? As soon as anything enters your head, you have to blurt it out. That's your big weakness.
You're right, you're right. I never seem to know what I think till I see what I say.
The girls are making their Christmas plans. You're taking them to the pageant at the Goodman Theater.
No, nothing doing. That was your idea.
Are you too big a figure to take them to a show like any ordinary father? You told them you would.
Me? Never. You told them yourself, and now you're imagining that I told them.
You're going to be in town, aren't you?
Well,
Or are you planning a little trip with Renata Fat Tits? Well, when you call Felicia and Mary and that ridiculous Playboy Mercedes-Benz, you will make sure it's well aired, won't you?
What are you talking about?
Well, we don't want lots of cigarette butts stained with fat tits lipstick, do we? We don't want lots of Kleenexes smeared with God knows what. How's your rival, by the way? Her boyfriend, Franzali, the Undertaker.
I refuse to discuss this, Denise.
Are you working at all?
Not too much.
Just playing paddleball with your mafia friends, I know. And pouring a barrel of money into that magazine you're supposed to be bringing out with your buddy Thaxter. Where's the first issue? Nessuno.
Matter of fact, I'm expecting Thaxter. Maybe today.
Oh, sure. He'll blow into town like the entire cast of A Midsummer Night's Dream. You'd rather foot his bills than give the money to your children.
My children have plenty of money. You have the house and hundreds of thousands.
I can't keep that barn going. You haven't seen the fuel bills. Let the CIA pick up the tabs for your magazine.
Why the CIA?
I've seen your prospectus. It's just the kind of thing the CIA could use for propaganda.
All I wanted to say in the prospectus was that America doesn't have to fight scarcity. And we all feel guilty before people who have to struggle for bread and freedom in the old way. We're not starving. We're not bugged by the police, locked up in a madhouse for our ideas, arrested, deported. We've been spared the Holocausts and the Nights of Terror. With our advantages, we should be formulating the basic new questions for mankind, but instead we sleep. We just sleep and eat and play and fuss and sleep again.
When you get solemn, you're a riot, Charlie. Now you're going in for this mysticism, as well as keeping that fat broad, as well as becoming an athlete, as well as dressing like a dude. All signs of mental and physical decline. I'm sorry. Really. Not just because I'm the mother of your children, but because you once had such brains and talent. You were doing such great work in the 60s. You might have stayed productive if the Kennedys had lived.
You sound like the late Humboldt. He was going to be the czar of culture under Stevenson.
The old Humboldt hung up, too. He was the last serious friend you had.
Yeah.
Does Renata want you to be a mystic?
She doesn't meddle that way. I'm not a mystic. Anyway, why is mystic such a bad word? Says there's something in human beings beyond the body and the brain. And we have ways of knowing that go beyond the organism and its senses. I always believed that.
You're a born crank, Charlie. And you're degenerating so fast without me. If you've lost your way, I could remind you. I could still straighten you out, Charlie.
You think you can?
I understand the mistakes we've both made. This life you're leading, it's too grotesque. The girls, the athletics, the trips. And now this anthroposophy. Your friends are so worried about you. Look, Charlie, why don't you marry me again? For starters, we could stop this legal fight. We should become reunited.
Is this a serious proposition?
It's what the girls want, more than anything. Think it over. You're not exactly leading a life of joy. You're in bad shape, Charlie.
Is sex similarly liberating and gets him out of the house, as it were? Because he's having an affair with a woman called Renata, which is running right through the book to the very end. Is this something which is he sees as a useful preoccupation? It's some useful preoccupation. Yes, I do mean that, because at a certain stage he almost says, again I'm paraphrasing, that the link between sexual activity and creative writing is very profound and strong. And Renata, apart from being someone who he thinks is in love with, is important to him for that reason.
Yeah, she stimulates him as a writer, and she is important to him for that reason. Freud had it the other way around. He said that artists pursued success because it got them so many women. Well, possibly. I don't know. I mean, I've not known so many writers who got sexually excited in the pursuit of literature, or who wanted to be writers because they would get more women. Maybe in Freud's Victorian times that was the case. I think it's much easier to get women than it was then. All you have to do is say that you are a writer. You don't have to write a damn word. That'll get them. But
why has that become such a conversational aphrodisiac on the American market, then?
You'd have to ask the ladies why it's such an aphrodisiac, but it does seem to work that way. But then there's very little that isn't an aphrodisiac these days. Almost anything will work. I don't know.
And is that, again, a distraction for Citrine and for Humboldt? Well, let's stick to Citrine at the moment. Is Renata a distraction for Citrine? You've written an essay about the distractions, the things which distract fiction writers. Is it a distraction, or is it a really profound stimulation? Is it a necessary stimulation?
Well, Charlie seems to think it is with Renata. But Renata is what we call in America a blood bank. She's a great nourisher. She's good for months of intravenous blood supply. And she stirs him up. He adores her. She is what he calls a noble creature, a beautiful, biologically beautiful, a noble animal. He quotes Santayana because he always has to have a text for this and so on. And she's a great wit. Renata is, I think, if I may be so bold as to claim that for one of my own characters. She is an extraordinarily witty woman. He likes that about her. She's also fresh and cheerful and everything that depressing Denise is not. And so he needs her. Of course, he's got her because he's a famous writer and he's got money.
Although when he sets out to capture in the first instance, being a famous writer and having money doesn't stop the whole initial encounter being a comic disaster.
I knew that you were Charles Citrine right away.
Charlie.
Charlie.
How did you know?
Your friend, Mr. Satsma. When he heard that you and I were going to be on this jury together, he thought we might enjoy getting to know one another. Mr. Satsma adores you. He is devoted to you. Why, he practically closes his eyes and looks poetic when he talks about you. And you know, he's such a stout man. You didn't really expect it. He told me all about your romances, about the girl who crashed in the jungle, and about your first romance with a doctor's daughter.
Naomi Lutz.
That's a crazy name.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Alex Sathmore handled your divorce.
Yes. Yes, he is my divorce lawyer, yes. Would you like to know about my husband? His name is Gaylord Cowfritz.
Is that so?
He's a salesman, Charlie. His line is crypts, tombs, and mausoleums. High-class stuff, custom built.
Oh, Christ, I can't stand funerals. I never even go to them.
I know how you feel. You know, he never would let up on anybody. He would sell crypts and mausoleums wherever we went. Once in a Russian steam bath.
I can't bear the thought of death.
He used to keep samples, models of crypts and tombs. They wore a hole in the floor of my Pontiac.
That's terribly sad.
When the deer disappear, there
are others waiting near.
I have a lovely little boy.
I feel so strange. Renata, at my age, a Buddhist would be thinking of disappearing forever into the forest. Do you think I'm going down with some sort of sex malaria? Renata? Some people are so actual that they beat down my critical powers. Once they're there, unimaginable, incontestable, nothing can stop them. Beyond a certain point of vividness, I become passionately attached.
You are an exceptional man, Charlie. Now listen. For an atypical foot, listen. You need an atypical shoe.
Well, that's very good. That's very true. How did you think of that?
You said it yourself.
I did?
You did.
You remember the things I say?
I know.
At this hotel, they have some rooms.
Do they?
They do. And they let them in the afternoons at what they call conference rates.
Conference rates. That sounds very nice.
And I'm sorry to say that I have arranged for a friend of mine to rent one of these rooms for me this afternoon under an assumed name. The barman is holding the key for me.
Don't be ashamed, Charlie. To err it is human. To bear it, divine.
I'll fix it. But do you have an envelope for me in the name of Crawley?
And now, what's this envelope?
Left for Crawley.
I got no Crawley.
Well, look again. Crawley must be there, if you don't mind.
No Crawley. What's your first name, buddy? Give me another clue.
Charles.
Ah, that's better. Wait, this could be you. C-I-T-R...
I know how to spell it, for Christ's sake.
Charlie,
Yeah?
don't you recognize me?
Why does it have to be so dark in these bars?
But Charlie, it's Naomi, your school day sweetheart.
Naomi Lutz?
Oh, Charlie, it's wonderful to run into you like this.
How do you happen to be at this bar?
I'm here with Dad.
He's alive?
Oh, he's fine. How you men keep going.
Naomi, I want to tell you, you were more than just my childhood sweetheart. I loved you with my soul, Naomi. If I'd been able to hold you in my arms since the age of 15, I would never have feared the grave.
Charlie, tell it to the Marie.
No, it's true.
Oh, you've had lots of girls. I can tell by your behavior over there.
I have to go, Naomi.
Yeah, I know you do. Charlie, listen. Yeah. Come and have a beer with me sometime. We can talk, huh?
Oh, yeah.
Wait. Here's where I am now. Oh, Charlie, what a handsome old guy you're turning into.
Oh,
You're not the type any woman can tie down, though.
I'll call you, Naomi.
Yeah.
Room service, please. Room service. We would like 2 double martinis, please, in room... What room number is this?
110.
In room 110. Thank you.
I hate to look out on a brick air shaft.
Oh, I know just how you feel, Charlie.
I feel... I know that this object is going to defeat me. I expect you to have an afternoon conference with a thing like this. This thing is like an IQ test.
So?
I'm flunking. I can't get it open.
So leave it.
Yeah?
Two martinis.
Put them down there, will you?
Done.
One for you. And one for me.
I told you.
Renata. Renata. Renata? Air. Air, that's it. Yeah. Renata. Renata. Christ.
One of the things that Citroën is determined to do is to keep his best thoughts in the front of his mind, even at his worst moments, and to keep the greatest ideas and the greatest writers part of even the most mundane and ordinary and abysmal parts of his life. And this creates a very fine tension. Is it something that the American audience is going to be familiar with or glad to recognize?
They won't be at all surprised. It goes back to the self-improvement programs of the 19th century. America has always been a great country for self-improvement, for beefing up the brain, and for learning. And there was an enormous movement in the 19th century called the Chautauqua movement. It started out in northern New York in a town called Chautauqua, under a big tent, under the big top. Lecturers came and harangued people about Darwin and Spencer and Goethe and Shakespeare and Voltaire and all of these things. And people turned out by the hundreds of thousands to be lectured at. Ralph Waldo Emerson, in his day, made the lecture circuit, and many others. They weren't all banquet speakers like Mark Twain, but there were always enormous lecture audiences in the States. Matthew Arnold came over to do that in the States. Oscar Wilde came over and did the same sort of thing. I don't remember whether Dickens actually lectured, but I think he gave readings. So there was always a grand public for that kind of thing in the States. And people were always extraordinarily high-minded. If you read Dickens's American Notes, you see that on flatboats in the Ohio River, people are chawing tobacco, spitting in the water, and discussing theology. So there's nothing new about it. And no American is surprised at this juxtaposition of hoodlums and Socrates.
And so the hoodlum Cantabile, who's a marvellous character in the book, is sort of never going to make it mafia man, whose family has been disgraced because it wasn't good enough at being a gangster, really. His real feeling for Citrine as a man of culture is a real feeling for him, isn't it?
That's right. Yes, that's right. There's an immense respect for that kind of thing, even among the dumbbells and the mafiosi. If you read the mafiosi themselves, whenever they commit themselves to writing, you see how very high-minded they can be. I mean, it's a sort of mixture of low cunning and high-mindedness in people, often in the States.
Is the position of a writer now just part of the business of American life? Has it been absorbed?
Well, until a certain moment in American history, writers were in the female category so far as the great public was concerned. That is, together with clergymen, pianists, painters, school teachers, and so on. They were on the skirt side of things. After the Second World War, the Philistinism in America became quite uneasy. For one thing, America had become a great power, needed culture. In the Cold War, it needed culture. For another thing, a great mass of people, young people, began to go to the universities. There are 20 or 30 million BAs in the United States by this time. This means that you have an educated mass. It may not know much, but it knows enough to respect culture. So things have changed in that respect. And now we have people full of poorly assimilated book learning and full of respect for art who have no real use for it. And so the situation of the writer has changed. That is to say, he's now a very desirable sort of person. Not that anybody will take the trouble to read him closely.
When Citrine, towards the end of the book, is up against the fact that his life is changing, or things are not disintegrating, they're reforming in some way, he goes in two directions. He goes into his mind, and he goes into ideas about what life could be like, and he keeps remembering the illuminations that he's had. But he also very directly, it seems to me, and goes back to the golden past. He meets the old girlfriend, Naomi Lutz, whom he wanted to hold. If he'd held her in his arms for the last 40 years, life would have been good. And he goes back to see her, and she's got nothing to do with, she's not one of the 20 or 30 million with BAs.
No.
She's bedrock.
She's hardcore vulgar. Yes. But that's all right. You see, he's partly that himself. These people are his family. He loves them just the same. He's an enormously affectionate fellow, I think. He's got very few mean characteristics. He knows what these people are, but he's attached to them in a family way. They're flesh of his flesh and bone of his bone. But he knows perfectly well what they are on the... he knows what their culture is. It's zero.
have the success and money and sex and the reaching out for being part of the American scene, have they prized him away from the certainties and, in a sense, you give us to understand the still possible serenities of Naomi Lutz?
Yes, well, she loves boxing and hockey and beer drinking and I don't know what the British equivalent would be.
More or less the same, boxing and
yes,
football and beer.
Yes, yes. Well, she'd spend her evenings in the pub or in front of the telly. Oh, she's that sort of person, and yet she's the girl he adored.
Coffee's brewed. Charlie, why don't you sit down? Take off that beautiful coat.
What, you going to take off any of that stuff yourself?
Yeah, sure.
Your hand.
There we go.
Do you remember those nights after I waxed your father's car? We'd heavy pet in a dark garage. How we used to make ourselves warm inside your raccoon coat.
Oh, Charlie. Charlie, I feel the cold now.
You really do this every day? Hang about in all weathers, holding up the traffic just to get the kids across the street?
That's not so much. You like my kitchen?
Naomi, I feel completely at home here.
Yeah. This house was all that Walper left me when he went. When I found out how much money he was losing on the horses, I insisted that he make the title over.
Smart thinking.
Yeah, well, I didn't even know then that he was paying juice to the gangsters. Not until they broke his nose and his ankle. That was just a warning.
Yeah, I know how it can be with these people.
When he came home from hospital, his face was purple around the bandages.
Yeah?
He cried, said he was no damn good, and he decided to disappear. He's all right now, though. He's married again. He has a bike shop in New Mexico. I think he feels safer nearer the border.
You should have married me, Naomi.
No. He was a jolly man. He didn't give me the trouble you would have given me. Or for a wedding present. He gave me my own convertible car and a charge account at Fields. That was what I wanted most out of life.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, this is all so good. Naomi, I always felt it would have given me strength to be married to you. You were the most beautiful and perfect young girl I ever saw.
Oh, Charlie. Don't idealize so much. You were a violent kid. You almost choked me to death because I went to some dance with some basketball player.
Oh, you exaggerate.
No, it's true. And that time in the garage when you put the rope around your neck and threatened to hang yourself if you didn't get your own way? Do you remember that?
I'm afraid I do, yeah. Super keen needs were swelling up in me. Do you remember those blue terry cloth pajamas you had?
Oh, yeah. You came into my room and made me take them off.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were thrilling, Charlie. But I never knew what you were talking about with your Swinburne and your Oscar Wilde and Baudelaire and Karl Marx. Boy, did you carry on.
Well, those were intoxicating books. I was in the thick of beauty. Wild about goodness and thought and poetry and love. Wasn't that merely adolescence?
Oh, I don't think so. You know, my dad said that your whole family was a bunch of greenhorns and aliens. Too damn emotional, the whole bunch of you, he said.
Doc said that, did he?
You know, he died last year.
Yeah, I heard that.
He finally fell apart. When old men start putting on 2 socks on one foot and pee into the bathtub, I guess that's the end.
Well, I myself always thought that Doc overdid that Yankee Doodle stuff. Now, what was he, dying to say goodbye to Jewry or to feudalism?
Charlie, would you do me a favor, please? I still freeze when you say a word like feudalism. That was the trouble between us. You came back from college full of words like that. And raving about that poet, Humboldt Park?
Fleischer.
Yeah. Then you borrowed my savings to take a Greyhound bus to New York.
Well, I felt I had to do it.
I really loved you, Charlie. But when you rolled away to see that God of yours, I went home and painted my fingernails and turned on the radio.
Naomi, I loved every cell of you.
Oh, it was all so easy for you. Your whole family was like that. You all loved each other so. You were like real primitive that way.
Well, my family became Americans, too. They lost all this immigrant-loving stuff. All except me, Naomi. No, I never lost it. Really, I never lost that intense way of caring. No, that's not true. That isn't so. I have lost it. The truth is, I require it of others. I require it continually, and I promise it. To women, I mean.
Yeah, I know.
That's always been the problem. I require it of them, and I make them feel that I'm a sort of man who could cherish them.
It's not true, is it? You've lost it, Charlie. You're not a cherishing man. You must have put it over on lots of girls. You must have made them very unhappy.
Well, I wonder whether mine is such an exceptional case of longing heart-itis. Hey, it's unreal, it's perverse, of course, but isn't it typically American? When I say American, I mean uncorrected by the main history of human suffering.
I'll never understand how or why you reach your conclusions. So whatever happened to that poet?
Humboldt? Oh, he's dead too, Naomi.
Isn't all this dying something, Charlie?
The whole thing is disintegrating and reintegrating all the time. And you have to guess whether it's always the same cast of characters or a whole lot of different characters. Anyhow, I've forgiven Humboldt now.
Oh, what was there to forgive?
Oh, he cashed a check on my account while I was knocking myself out in the jungle.
You mean he forged your signature?
No, I gave him a blank check and he filled it in.
Well...
Yeah, for $6,000. The bastard bought himself a new car with it.
No.
Yeah.
No, and you didn't expect a poet to be like that about money. Oh, Charlie. Charlie, forgive me for laughing, but you always did provoke people to do the nasty human thing to you.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I never did understand the deeper side of human nature. I could have been so different if I'd slept with you for 40 years.
Ah, now, Charlie, don't get sentimental, please.
No, I have to tell you, Naomi. I loved you cell by cell. Your molecules were my molecules. Your smell was my smell.
You old sex pot. You need a woman with a heart as big as a washing machine. Aren't you still with that chick I saw you with in the bar? The gorgeous one with the big eyes.
Yeah, she is gorgeous. And I am still the boyfriend.
Boyfriend? Charlie, what is it with you? A big, important, clever man going around so eager from woman to woman. Haven't you got anything more important to do? You're going to go to Europe with that young broad, too, aren't you?
Who told you that?
George Slibel.
Well, I wish George wouldn't go around telling my plans to everybody.
Charlie, we've all known each other a lifetime.
Well, these things get back to Denise.
You think you can keep anything from that woman? Huh, she could see through a wall of steel. And you're no wall of steel, Charlie. Yeah, but whatever you are, I get a big kick out of seeing you. You're a sweet fella. This visit is a great treat for a poor plain broad. Charlie.
Yeah?
Would you humor me about one thing?
Yeah, sure, Naomi, if I can.
Well, I really and truly loved you. But, well, I married a regular sort of Chicago person because I never knew what you were at, and I didn't think you'd ever make any money. Well, I was only 18. But I've often wondered if you'd make more sense to me now I'm 53. So, Charlie, would you talk to me the way you talk to, well, your intelligent friends? Better still, the way you talk to yourself. Like, well, did you have an important thought yesterday?
Yeah, I thought about sloth, Naomi.
Sloth?
Yeah.
Well, okay. Tell me about this. And remember, you're not going to tone this down. You're going to say it to me the way you say it to yourself.
Well, some think that sloth means ordinary laziness. Sticking in the mud, sleeping at the switch, but sloth has to cover a great deal of despair. Sloth is really a busy condition, hyperactive. This activity drives off the wonderful balance without which there can be no poetry or art or thought, none of the highest human functions. These slothful sinners are not able to acquiesce in their own being, as some philosophers say. They labor because rest terrifies them. The old philosophy distinguished between knowledge achieved by effort, ratio, and the knowledge received by the listening soul, intellectus. Yeah?
Yeah.
Now, this kind of knowledge, hearing the essence of things, calls for unusual demands of the soul. The more so since society claims more and more of your inner self and infects you with its restlessness, trains you in distraction, it colonizes your consciousness. The true poise, that of contemplation or imagination,
sits right on the border of sleep and dreaming. Now, Mammy, as I was lying, stretched out in America, determined to resist its material interests, I fell into a deep snooze that lasted for years, decades. Evidently, I didn't have what it took. And what it took was more strength, more courage, more stature. America's an overwhelming phenomenon, of course, but that's no excuse, really. Luckily, I'm still alive, and perhaps there's even some time left.
Is this really a sample of your mental process?
Yeah.
Oh, Christ, Charlie.
You're, in all your books, and again in this, there's one of the underlying themes is the fight between fiction and fact in this century. In your opinion, what's the score? Who's winning?
Well, much that we think of as fact is really fiction. As you get into the head of any educated person and look into what it contains, you'll find a great many fictions which are represented as facts. What do I know about the speed of light? I simply take the physicist's word for it. I've never measured it myself. And yet I think of myself as a person who has a scientific worldview. Fat chance. I haven't got a scientific worldview. I've just got a lot of prejudices. I got a lot of head culture, which were described to me by well-accredited colleges as a scientific worldview. I don't know a damn thing about those things. My imagination knows more about them than my mind does. But I won't trust my imagination because I think that I owe it to everyone to give a rational view of everything. Well, I've got a lot of head culture, and so have other people got lots of head culture.
But do you see imagination being threatened by the force and insistence on information, force of and insistence on information at the moment?
Yes, I think that people want to know what really is going on, and they ask any public spokesman, anyone who prints for large numbers or speaks for large numbers of people, is asked to give dependable information. Now, this quest for information, it seems to me, is the enemy of fiction. And besides, what is represented to be information is often fiction. People think that they're thinking about politics or economics, about taxes, about war, about sex, about race, about religion, all these other pressing questions of the day. What they have is crisis chatter. They haven't got any facts. They've got what the media have given them. They've got what they've acquired conversationally over the table. They've got what they've dug out of a certain number of books. But as for knowledge, go whistle for it. You haven't got it.
Finally, I'd like to ask you why, what led you to the idea of making Charlie Citrine one of his preoccupations in the book that he's thinking of writing, is to do with boredom and great bores. What took you to that?
Well, I think it's about time the subject of boredom is thoroughly investigated. Everyone suffers from it. No sociologist that I know of has ever dealt with it. Very few psychologists. I wonder if that's because they're so often boring themselves it never crosses their minds to do it. But it is a form of spiritual suffering, and theologians knew about it in the Middle Ages. Seems to have dropped from sight as a subject. I think it's time it was revived. Why not? And besides, it's next door to the problem of death, which Humboldt is about.
If you were asked to sum it up in one sentence, you would say that Humboldt was about death.
Yes, I'd say it was a presumptuous book which attempts to make a comedy of death.
Saul Bellow, and we'll be back in a fortnight with a programme exploring and showing the striking and, in a way, uncanny art of the British theatre of the deaf. Good night.